is a mistake in the Russian version of the agenda. It's written kind of exploitation, but I will talk about enterprise network, and mainly it will be about operators. First of all, I'd like to say that I'm very happy to be here as the speaker, and I'd like to say thank you to the organizers and the committee. I'm very happy to be here in Odessa and Ukraine, and I'm very grateful to my Ukrainian colleagues that they invited me at these not very easy times. So my name is Pavel Lunin from Senate C company, and for the recent 10 years I used to work with the operator, then integrator. I'm in the center of Halivara. These are people dealing with the corporate networks and operators networks. I was either a consultant when they introduced some autonomous systems, and also communicate with operators on this issue. Or, for example, deal with vendors, where very often they have different departments like SP enterprise, and there are some disputes whose technologies are better, what are the situation. Very often I'm observing them for a period of time. I have some conclusions from my observations, and I want to share this information with you. I think it's going to be useful for the operators to understand better this business. So why I'd like to talk about my topic about enterprise networking, because they have a significant impact on the operator's business. How it happens? First of all, corporate networks. These are the customers of the operators. They pay money to operators for the data exchange services, for maintenance, and for the advertisements in the source. And of course, they can demand certain requirements. Moreover, operators industry is not a vacuum. It's a part of huge IT landscape, which includes such topics as technologies, protocols, IPs. They are of course common for both operators and enterprise networks. Switches, operator systems very often are similar. Human factor is an important factor. Most often energy engineers start their careers in the corporate networks, or like admins, or they start to learn different situations, and then later they move to enterprise networking and dealing with the LPS. Vendors and other like Juniper, as well known, work at both markets and observe carefully also enterprise networking. A certain class of vendors, these are the producers of chips, our common, well-known producer of chips. They are very well oriented on enterprise features, and even we do like to have chips with the support of MPLS. So far it didn't happen. About money, everything is obvious. For investors, banks, they don't care whether they deal with the operator or enterprise. It doesn't matter for them. Example number one, data centers. Some time ago, Amazon company was well known as the bookstore. Now it's one of the key infrastructure providers in the internet. How it happened? All of a sudden it happened. And we not that we even noticed it at the very beginning. In early 2000s, nobody knew even such word as data center. Everybody was familiar to the word DMZ. And all of a sudden, by the end of 2000s, and about was 2009, I paid attention to the fact that all of a sudden, all people's money were directed to swords. This became the most modern kind of urge of technology. Second example, this is Ethernet revolution. Haven't seen the operators' networks based on some STP circle. They don't know. Maybe you should better live the audience, why did it happen? We already started this discussion during the course of the previous session. At some time, cheap enterprise switches appeared on the market, and the operators had to use them for all the purposes. Moreover, not only for some routing technologies, but also at the access point. At that time, when all companies and enterprise networks, they came to a situation when they had to address operators and ask them a question: why do you sell us 2 megabits internet? Why you do it through some strange interface E1? How we can use it? Now let's, for example, as though some other people, or you would provide us with their net, and how you're gonna switch it, we don't care. And operators had to abandon all the PDH, PDM, the cable modems, and they started to introduce switches, modem switches. Otherham, and of course we all know that such services in multi-point and bridged VM are very popular. They substitute significantly, and this is a kind of huge headache, because there are not many good technologies which allow to do it, and especially for the cheap price. During the course of this process, we try to develop different technologies which would allow us to do it with a good quality and cheap, and some companies even became bankrupt because of that. This is was an introduction why it's important. What's the difference from my point of view? What's the difference between operators and enterprises? I think that operators networks, these are networks for which traffic equals to money, amounts to money. More traffic they have, more presence points they have, the better is for them, the better profit they get. In corporate networks, it's slightly different. Like for banks, some corporate networks can be even in a damage, but in fact the number of traffic doesn't impact the prosperity of business. And it's of course sometimes difficult to trace. Like for example, as I mentioned, Amazon shifted to a different state, to a different status, and they even themselves didn't notice it from the very beginning. It all brings to a number of issues, economical issues and social issues. Let's move to different topics. This is an example to show you what does it mean operators industry within the framework of global economy. I have some slides where I prove it by certain links, but based on the number of companies, information on the number of companies and other kind of data like staff number of staff, profit, etc., etc. Anyway, we talk about the single points of the percentages from the general economics. There is some number of networks who are present and work within the operators and enterprise networks, but I think it's only about 10% who work with the operators. The rest work in the enterprise sector. I have a number of slides where I can prove this information by statistics. For those of you who would be interested, you can then look at those slides separately. Some statistical data on AS. We have 4 alive ASs in the enterprise network, and 30%, 50%. I can't say there are. So some part of the ASs have a kind of feature of being enterprise. Maybe it's not that many addresses being on, single prefix, lack of transit. I would say, of course, this is not 100% proof that this AS belongs to the enterprise networking, but let's say 30% in general in the internet belong to the enterprise sector. Maybe there are around 30,000 providers in the world globally who are providers. The rest are not operators. These are enterprise networks. CCIE statistics, it's not a secret that more than 80% of CCIE is routing, switching and security, and about 10% of people consider themselves more competent in the providers' technologies. It's not, it doesn't reflect their place of work. Of course, like for example, people who took a routing switch, they work as operators, but this at least provides at least some picture. some kind of intermediary conclusions. Enterprise network is a big market. It's interesting and attractive for different vendors, especially for the producers of chips. This creates quite strong pressure on the industry from the commercial point of view, from the point of view of the products available at the market, especially from the point of view of demand on this or that services. More or less, as you can see based on the statistics shown on the example of the autonomous systems, this is not the key interest of the economy, and more or less all the operators have to react to this situation. As a rule, it happens as kind of trying to achieve that goal, but it brings us to the changes in the operator's business. How does it happen? In the left column you can see technologies which this or that way have their commonality in the enterprise network, and on the right column you can see those mainly present in the operators networking. You can see that left column there are more popular technologies, widely spread technologies, and now they are also providers technologies, which means that the technology drift happens from a kind of massive market, and it goes and fills the provider's niche as well. So there are some certain kind of types in this or that sector, but it's more kind of niche thing. IPv6 is a separate example about which I'll talk a bit later. At the same time, what is one of the important factors, and that enterprise technologies and providers industry, not only when they are of good quality or bad quality. With an example with Ethernet, this is kind of painful example. Ethernet was not a very good technology for providers when it entered the market, and when providers had to start using it. Everybody knows the NATO example, which is the worst example. But when it's like providers have no choice. This was the technology which was commonly used, started to be commonly used in the internet technologies, and providers just had to follow it. UBS, even they are good, of good quality, they also can't be promoted well, which means that the products for providers have a very specific character. They are not in a huge demand, and therefore the price for the unit is much higher than if you would compare, for example, with something else, with like switch with 40 ports, which would cost 10,000, for example. And if you take 10 gigabits, 40 ports, a switch, even optimized with the routing, there are some of those examples on the market, you can't even buy it for 100,000. IPv6, continue with our hello. This is a kind of Google graph. This is the Google statistics as to the share of IPv6 at the market. This is a general graph, and this is a picture for the last half of a year. About a month and a half I did my previous presentation. It looks beautiful, it looks nicely. You can see the growth every year is increased in 2 times, but you can see it's this picture slightly changed. The upper it goes, the more vibrations you can see. These are weekly cycles. People stay at home during weekend at home, and the use of IPv6 grows. When they come back to work, it drops. Especially you can see in the middle of the picture, this is New Year holidays. Of course, during the week, people often use home internet and mobile internet, and therefore the difference between these vibrations in this graph are most obvious. What we can expect in this connection, there is a big chance that in some time we will see the changes in these graphs. If you already look at this graph carefully, you could already observe this phenomena. So we have a fear that the lower border will start to kind of idle, will start to lose its tempo, and because enterprise doesn't there is no demand for IPv6 in the enterprise network, and this situation can happen. Why? Really, enterprise is not in demand of IPv6. They don't understand what is it about, how to use it. Therefore, enterprise doesn't create any marketing pressure on providers. They don't demand IPv6 from providers or from vendors. There's no this mass marketing pressure, and therefore IPv6 is now kind of sitting in the provider's niche. And it would be good if it would kind of take its place at the mass marketing, but currently the situation is slightly different. It's not a very good sign, despite the fact that in recent years there were certain changes. There is a number of issues connected with the corporate networks. This is the community of enterprise networkers. They have a problem. They don't know with whom they can talk. Because of their specificity, the operator's business is built in a way that there is the direct communication between networks in the operators and enterprises is very difficult. It's not because they are bad people, but that's because how this business is built. Different managers, different IVRs, so there is a lack in the direct communication. Therefore, at least to the situation, they don't know anything about each other. Enterprise can't understand what is it providers networking, what services they provide, what they do there. For example, there is such a wonderful word, course. They all talk about this course, but nobody knows what is it about. So they don't realize that it is very expensive and not that useful. Yeah, sometimes they just don't know about different products. And providers sometimes are a bit naive towards the understanding what their customers need. Therefore, all technical complications which run out of the situation look the following. Besides, there is a lack of communication between both. There is also, let's say, there is such kind of IT community, like our meetings, for example, which deals with the development of technologies or separate vendor meeting. These meetings are a bit just focused, targeted on people who are dealing with the operators' technologies. And therefore, there are not many places in the world where enterprise engineers could talk to somebody and to try to understand what is IPv6, what is the protection from DDoS, and etc. And for enterprise, the main source of technical information, this is a kind of product technical documentation provided by vendors or from open source. This is the information about how to perform the certain settings, like click here, click there, put the trace there. But they don't know much about additional things and service. And when Alexei made an excellent presentation tutorial about the protection from DDoS, I understood that his recommendations, 30% of recommendations, they are mainly for the holder of the quality resource. And a lot have been mentioned that it would be better to communicate with them stronger. And very often the providers, the communicators, are not capable to do it. They don't know how to cooperate, communicate with their corporate clients, and therefore it's not a secret that such classical operators, which provide some services for corporations, they don't deal with the DDoS only simply because they don't know how to build profiles, how to communicate, how to collaborate, and therefore specialized companies can enter these markets. And etc., etc. This same situation with the IP addresses, with layers. For example, when they need some independent addresses, even they know what is it, autonomous system, then they know whom to approach. They mainly approach their managers. Managers doesn't know what is anything about the autonomous systems, and so it can stuck during the course of different email correspondence. And despite the fact that enterprise networks is one of the key stakeholders of the internet, it happens so they don't participate in this process. We don't get much feedback from them. If we don't have an opportunity to inform them about anything. I have a number of very technical slides, but because I plan to skip them because we don't have much time, let's just I will show you them just for example. Technical implication, yes, I mentioned already that it's true that enterprise networking are not designed very well. It's not because they're stupid there, but only because they don't need it. Let's say for them it's not such painful implication as, for example, to provider. First technical issue. This is internet routing. Which should be built completely different for enterprise networking. They should be based on completely different principles and focused on something different. Now maybe here I would talk a little bit more in detail. Based on its nature, corporate network tries to be less transparent. And when we talk about IPv6, about transparency, about all these sort of things, it's not clear. All these sort of things are not clear and applicable for enterprise networks. They very often have firewall at the entrance, and nobody is going to remove it from there. Like it's not a problem like for the operators that there is something at the entrance. For the corporate network, it's not a problem. They have firewall there, and doesn't matter whether they're going to use IPv6 or IPv7 or whatever. It's not a difference for them. As to the motivation for the introduction of IPv6 from the point of view of enterprise networking, of course, their motivation should be built on different factors. Maybe at some stage we should discuss it in more detail. But it's not the situation when you say you can now then abandon NAT or processing or something like that and reach transparency, because you understand that's not the objective. And it's not good, because if we understand that if there would be a marketing pressure from the internet provider, they will have to do it. Some kind of to reserve something in the enterprise network, and it's also built on different principles. And internal routing in the enterprise networks, it has been considered as kind of ARIA or something like that. Traditionally, it is considered to be true. But if we now think that it's not very applicable for us today, and even there are best books about enterprise routing, all of them will be dedicated to this topic. It is not good. Let's say that unfortunately this creates a situation when the enterprise networking doesn't want to learn or to know more about the operators and providers. So this is a brief summary. And my main conclusion, wrap up from what I was talking about, I think that it is necessary to communicate more with enterprise networks. We have now kind of a brick wall built between us, and it's not good for both. We don't understand well what's going on at the big market, which kind of actually is the basis for the creation of the the situation with the enterprise networking. And those examples with the net swords, so we all saw these examples. It happened beyond the control of the operators, happened beyond their will, and that's the current situation, and that was this Ethernet drift. So we should talk more with enterprises. We should try to understand their problems and situation. Thank you.
Excellent. Questions for Pavel? So much good IPv6 there. That must be a good question. So I have a quick question. I mean, the enterprises have obviously much more resources than the operators. Should we be trying to convince them to do IPv6, or should we listen to them, since they really don't demand IPv6?
Yeah, I personally, I'm absolutely sure about that. And I think that if we manage to convince enterprises to deploy IPv6, we will have IPv6 everywhere, because operators won't have any chance to avoid it. But I have to highlight that the motivation of the enterprises to deploy IPv6 is completely different than it is for operators. That's what I want to say.
Anyone, any others? All right, well, thank you.